As you can see, the title, Mindfulness, 3D Multiple Object Tracking and Socio-emotional Functioning, a pilot project. And I did pre-register this project on OSF. And I just want to take a second to just share that I really believe in pre-registration as part of science. And so I've made a commitment to do all my projects as pre-registered projects. Now, I'll also say that this project was started almost a year ago now. And as you might imagine, there was something that happened in March that would have contributed to research shutting down. So I initially wanted to do a larger project, but because of the pandemic, we had to cut our sampling off. And so I decided to make this into a pilot project because it's something that I believe that can take forward in the future and kind of add to it. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. We'll talk about the background and give kind of an overview of the literature. I'll discuss the purpose and the methods, some statistics and analyses, and discussion implications and limitations. So what is mindfulness? This is probably a question that has a lot of people wondering what it is in general. And so I have the definition here from Brandmeier and Delorme. Mindfulness is a self-regulated attentional state focused on present moment experience, emphasizing features of curiosity, openness, and acceptance. And so I want to highlight two things here. One of them is going to be attention, and the other one is this idea of acceptance. And there are many misconceptions about mindfulness that I want to address to begin with. Oftentimes, many people believe that mindfulness is about removing things from your mind. We have this idea that our minds are full of thoughts and emotions and experiences. And with mindfulness, that all kind of goes away and it's emptiness. And there's this idea that you've transcended into these different states of being. And I don't think that's actually quite accurate when we're talking about mindfulness. Definitely, you can have times where there's a clearing out of the thoughts when you're really focused in the present moment. I'm sure you've experienced this yourselves pretty regularly when you come home from a long, hard day at work and you kind of sit back in your chair and you just go, right? You're just in that present moment. Your mind is kind of exhausted and clear, and it's not disrupted by thoughts. And so there's this attendance to the present moment in a very particular way that is important in mindfulness. So just to continue on. So mindfulness can be kind of broken up into three things: state, trait, and skill. We'll talk a little bit about skill in a minute. And so that state of mindfulness is exactly what we were talking about before, just kind of that present moment awareness. And we'll talk about meditations as well and how it can facilitate this present moment awareness. And you can think about any time where you've really been engaged in a conversation. You're not necessarily thinking about what you're going to say next. You're just attending to the person, listening, and being in the moment fully and completely with clarity. And so this is the type of state that we're talking about. And this can be characterized within a meditation context, or as I was saying before, even outside of a meditation context when you've come home from a long day at work. And so the second one is trait mindfulness. And so this is just an overall dispositional characteristic of mindfulness that each person has. And as you might imagine, we measure this through a variety of self-report measures, and it's usually trying to get at, okay, are you attending to the present moment regularly, or are you kind of in your head and often thinking about the past and the future and not really fully engaged with what you're doing in the present moment? And I'm sure we've all experienced this, particularly while driving, where, you just have this autopilot of where you're going. Maybe you're thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner. Maybe you're thinking about what your kids are doing, or where you're going to have to go in the future. Or maybe you're resonating and dealing with something in the past that's even more painful, and you're just trapped in your head thinking about these things while you're driving. So you're not fully engaged with what is coming to your attention. Then all of a sudden somebody cuts you off, and boom, you stop thinking about that one thing, and there's this complete switch to being fully engaged with what's happening in the present moment. And so people who are more engaged fully in the present moment, that's kind of what we would characterize as trait-based mindfulness. And so when we talk about mindfulness, it's really hard to differentiate between what's mindfulness and what's meditation. And I'll just say that meditations are a variety of exercises that can help promote mindfulness. Oftentimes it's called mindfulness meditation because you're really trying to facilitate this present moment awareness with the attitude of acceptance. And so it's the medium by which the skills of mindfulness are developed. And so there's a variety of different types of meditations, and we can differentiate them into three categories. The first category is attention-based meditations. And so focused attention is the first type of meditation. We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a moment here, but essentially what you're trying to do is you're focusing your attention on a target object. Now this target object can be internal to you, like your breath, or it can be external, like sounds or sights. You can also focus so it can be an internal or external object of focused attention. Open awareness meditation is a little bit wider aperture of attention. With focused attention, your aperture is very narrow. You're focused on one object. With open awareness, you're trying to be aware of whatever is popping into your consciousness in the present moment, whether that be thoughts, emotions, feelings. Maybe there's a tug in the back of your back. Maybe there's some birds chirping in the background. Maybe there's the hum of your air conditioner going, or heater going in this case. It's quite cold out there. And so when you're doing the practice, you're just trying to be attentive about whatever is appearing in your consciousness in the present moment. The next type of meditation practice is called constructive practices. Now, this is very similar to attention-based. You are sitting, but instead of focusing on what's happening in the present moment, you are actively constructing a situation or idea in your mind. Oftentimes with loving kindness, you think about a person who you have a close relationship with, and you wish upon them the best things, the most out of their life. You try to construct feelings of compassion towards that person. And so you can start with maybe somebody who is a close friend, someone you don't have as much trouble bringing up those compassionate feelings for. And gradually you can work your way towards people that you dislike or even all of humanity. And it's really about facilitating these ideas in your head to become more passionate, or compassionate, pardon me. And so that's the idea behind constructive meditations. Now, deconstructive meditations is probably part of where you might even get your ideas of what mindfulness is or what meditation is. You know, being a Buddha, having this self-transcendence that that people often talk about when they talk about mindfulness and meditation and Buddhism in general, right? It's this idea that we're becoming a higher being or something like that. And I will say that that is a common misinterpretation. Essentially, what non-dual practice is recognizing that there is no self to actually transcend. The self is something that is constructed within our consciousness as part of this ego, and recognizing what is your consciousness in the present moment is part of a non-dual practice. So you can do meditation practices that where you're turning your attention on yourself, and you notice more and more clearly that there is no self to notice when you turn your attention there. And that is part of the practice of deconstructive meditation or non-dual meditation. And so these are the types of meditations that help facilitate both state-based mindfulness and trait-based mindfulness. And so the theoretical framework that I'm using for this particular project is called monitor and acceptance theory. And I'll talk a little bit about attention monitoring. And you can think about attention monitoring as the focused attention that you would do towards the object of interest or the object of your attention in a focused attention meditation. And there's also some monitoring going on in the background for when you inevitably get distracted by your own thoughts, or like I said, maybe some pain in your back, any type of emotions that are coming up. So you're constantly monitoring to become aware of when you do become distracted. And part of that is, as you're doing this and you do inevitably become distracted, you have to take this attitude of acceptance that this is inevitably going to be part of the process. And you can see down in the picture there, just the cycle of focused attention meditation where you're sustaining your attention on the breath. There's some spontaneous thoughts and you become distracted in your own head, distracted by thoughts. And meta-awareness or monitoring allows you to notice this distraction. And once you are able to notice it, you reorient your attention right back to the breath or the object of your attention. And there are 4 key brain networks that are implicated in this process. One is your frontoparietal control network, which kind of exerts some top-down control. Default mode network, which is part of it's like your resting state network where thoughts are popping up by virtue of the default mode network, and it's linked to memories and so on and so forth. So it really emphasizes mind wandering, right? So once our attention goes away from the object of our attention, we're into the mind wandering field, and the default mode network kind of becomes more active. And as I said, as soon as you notice there's some meta-awareness going on that you have become distracted, then we notice that the salience network becomes more active, and you're attending to, oh my goodness, there's something very salient in your attention that you need to draw your attention to. And that was that you've become distracted. And then you reorient yourself back. And lastly, the dorsal attention network, which is just facilitating all the attentional processes that are happening there. And here's just kind of a visualization of that in a little bit more detail. So you see sustaining and the traditional attention-based networks, alerting network, executive network, and orienting network that are involved in attention. And with this meditation process, there's sustaining attention, becoming distracted by mind wandering, your monitoring that goes on and your awareness. You disengage or let go of the mind wandering. And that's helping to disengage you is the attitude of acceptance, right? We're not judging ourselves for screwing up and becoming distracted, right? Oftentimes with beginners, they get very discouraged by this distraction. They think that they're doing it wrong, or they think that they're not good at the practice at all. But that's actually just part of the practice, and noticing how thoughts just appear in your consciousness and emotions and sensations just appear. With that understanding that comes, you can get a better, that is facilitative of well-being, as we'll see here in a moment as well. Okay, so what is some benefits of this mindfulness training? Well, we see you can have some improved attention and emotion regulation, improved well-being, improved immune function, reducing stress, and increased white and gray matter. Now, let's talk about the Neuro Tracker. We've seen that, okay, so mindfulness has this process that's really bound up in attention. Not that others aren't, but there is a specific training of attention that's happening in mindfulness. Similarly, the Neuro Tracker helps train your attention. So the Neuro Tracker is a visual, let's call it a game, where multiple objects are in your visual field, as you see here. There's little 8 balls in a visual field, and they're constantly moving, and you have to track 4 target objects. And that helps train different types of attention. So sustained attention, selective attention, divided attention, and inhibition. It also improves working memory and information processing. And there are 4 characteristics that are emphasized for external validity. So essentially that the training that you do in the Neuro Tracker helps extend outside of the training to the real world. And so multiple object tracking is one. A large visual field is the second one. There's a variety of speed thresholds, and visual stereoscopy are the 4 characteristics. And they base this on 2 fundamental principles. So in order to make the Neuro Tracker functional in terms of improving cognitive capabilities, it must be relatively simple in order to operate on specific cognitive functions like attention, like working memory, like information processing. And if it were too complex, the Neuro Tracker would lose its ability to isolate. And so the second principle involves isolating specific cognitive functions in which to improve and overloading them. Thus, you're developing the functions through the brain's natural neuroplasticity. So, do you want to play a game? You see here, you start out with 8 balls, and 4 balls will highlight for 2 seconds will kind of highlight in an orange color, and then they'll turn back to yellow. The balls will start moving around in this three-dimensional space, and they'll bounce off each other, they'll bounce off the walls, they'll bounce off the top and the bottom. And then you get to select which ones were the 4 target objects after 8 seconds. So this is essentially the process of the game. You're monitoring these 8 balls. You're selectively attending to 4 of them as they're being as they're trying to distract you and moving about, and you sustain that attention for 8 seconds. And this process has continued on. Typically, you do 20 trials of this and 3 blocks of 20. So you do 60 trials in total. And so the Neuro Tracker also has some benefits that are attributed to it. The Neuro Tracker has been linked with cognitive improvements in a variety of domains, including aging in athletes, both collegiate and elite, medical students, military personnel, and young adults. Okay, so what is the purpose of this study? So we're trying to seek to first establish a relationship between 2 tools of cognitive enhancement, one of them being mindfulness, and 3D multiple object tracking is the other. And by first establishing a relationship, it gives us a foundational basis for exploring the relationship further through experimentally controlled trials. So we're just trying to get an idea of, is there something here to actually see? They both seem to have improvements in cognitive functioning. So is there a relationship here? So we used cross-sectional design. Originally, we had targeted at least 250 participants. And in the pilot here, we have 69 between an age range of 18 and 63. And they had to be 18 years of age. They had to speak English, and they had to have normal or corrected to normal vision. And they couldn't be a U of R athlete because athletes participate in the Neuro Tracker. So we wanted to basically control for practice effects that the athletes would have. People with epilepsy were not allowed to participate. People with color vision deficiencies were not allowed to. And people who used the Neuro Tracker previously were not supposed to be in the participant. So we recruited through the participant pool, through research email lists, through posters. I'm sure you might have even come across one in the kinesiology building at some point or another. And we used a variety of materials for this. So obviously we used the Neuro Tracker. The Philadelphia mindfulness scale was chosen very specifically. And that's because it has 2 subscales. One is present moment awareness, and the second is acceptance. So this scale fit really well with monitor and acceptance theory. And because of that fit, that's why we chose this scale. And then we wanted to get a variety of socio-emotional functioning scales as well. So we looked at perceived stress. We looked at personal relative deprivation. Just to briefly explain, personal relative deprivation is comparing yourself to another person or to those in your peer group and feeling deprivation compared to the rest of them. So I can use myself as an example. I'm a graduate student, and I look at all the other graduate students in my field, and I think, oh my goodness, I'm the worst graduate student ever. Like I'll never compare to these other people. And so this causes some serious distress on my functioning, my emotional functioning in it. And personal relative deprivation has been linked to depression and ill-being, both physical and mental ill-being. We also checked out the self-compassion scale and the PERMA well-being scale and the mindset questionnaire, along with some demographic information. So the procedure that we had participants go through, obviously they completed their consent first, and we got them to do a practice block of the Neuro Tracker just to get some familiarity with what the Neuro Tracker is, because it's such a novel thing to encounter in general, especially that first time. We wanted to give participants just a sense of what they were getting into. So they did less than 10 trials on the practice session of the Neuro Tracker, which doesn't even get you to select anything. It just kind of goes through the 8 seconds so you can visually see what's going to happen. And then they did one session of the Neuro Tracker, which is those 3 blocks or 60 trials that I said. And then they completed the scales and the demographics and received a debriefing. So here's kind of what we found. And I just did some correlational analyses to start off, because I wanted to see, is there a there? Is there something that's interesting here? And what we saw here was there was no significant correlations between a Neuro Tracker composite score. So just kind of combine, Neuro Tracker comes up with a composite score based on how you perform in the trials. And so we correlated that with the total Philadelphia mindfulness scale. So basically a total score of your mindfulness, acceptance and awareness. And we actually had age and sex as significant correlations with the Neuro Tracker. So I wanted to put that in there just to show that age and sex seem to make a difference, but mindfulness, not quite as much. Now, I will say that the acceptance subscale, which ran counter to our hypothesis, which was that mindfulness and Neuro Tracker score would be correlated significantly, and awareness would be the one that would significantly correlate. But it was actually acceptance that seemed to make a difference. And I'll talk about that, why that might be in a little bit. But the acceptance subscale approached significance, and I'll talk a little bit again about what I think that we can do about that. But it is important to note that we did not reach significance in these scales, in these correlations. And so whether that means anything or not with this small pilot project, we'll have to see. And so when it comes to socio-emotional functioning, we did some correlations here, and we had some significant results. Relative deprivation, people who were more relatively deprived had less mindfulness. People with higher perceived stress had less mindfulness. People with greater self-compassion had more mindfulness. Well-being and mindfulness were positively correlated. And mindset, which was negatively correlated, was an interesting result as well. None of these factors correlated with the Neuro Tracker at all, which was expected. And so what does this all mean? What do these few correlations really tell us? Well, I think that there's 2 interpretations that we can have, that we can see from this. And I think the first one really comes from acceptance seems to be either a factor by nature of its I believe the significance was 0.1. Now, that could mean that it's not correlated and it will continue to not be correlated. It could also mean that with a higher sample size, which with the expected sample size that I anticipated having, Sample sizes tend to stabilize at around 250 participants. So that was why I set that goal. With a greater sample size, you might see that trend towards significance. But that's still counter to our hypothesis. We hypothesized that awareness and attention would be the most important factor there. And there's been some evidence to suggest that acceptance actually can underlie some of the improvements in attention training, as monitor and acceptance theory have noted. But it does kind of speak to perhaps it's being more open to what's going on in the present moment and not judging yourself, perhaps even for failures, that you can move on to the next moment more easily and attend to the present moment more easily because you're able to let go of the past more easily. I also want to highlight that the mindfulness and well-being results are very consistent with previous literature. We consistently see that mindfulness does seem to be a factor in well-being. What was interesting too is mindset, which was kind of a new scale to look at in regards to mindfulness, was correlated. And so we can see that having a positive mindset and mindfulness were correlated. So that might have some future implications that we can look into a little bit more deeply. Now, what I really wanted to do for this pilot project was deploy some Bayesian analysis. And the reason why I wanted to deploy some Bayesian analysis is because it actually is better at predicting, or it's better at having more confidence in what results you're seeing, particularly with small sample sizes. So it's just a little bit of a different way of viewing the data. And if I had some better understanding of Bayesian analysis, I think I would have brought it into this presentation. But I really didn't feel quite confident yet to present that analysis at all. And so I think that can be a valuable tool going forward to do some Bayesian analysis and see, is that accepted? Will we have more confidence in that acceptance correlation if we use Bayesian analysis? Is there going to be more confidence in that result by using a different statistical method? And of course, the aim of the entire study is to get a full sample. And so that's definitely a future direction for this project. We want to get a full sample to really do the analysis properly, and I think that can therefore lend itself to more rigorous study in the future as well. So briefly some implications and limitations, and then we can get to some questions. So as I said, promote the further study of attentional processes and dispositional mindfulness. We really want to push this idea that we can find out what's really going on with these attentional processes and mindfulness. And I think it's worthwhile to find out what's going on there. And to do that more rigorously as well. We can't just have these simple studies be the crux of our arguments. We need to develop more complex ways of studying this, perhaps even providing some intervention studies where you can compare mindfulness, meditation training, and 3D multiple object training. Maybe you can pit them against one another, or you can actually do a combination of the two, seeing if that has implications on cognitive processes as well as well-being processes. Since we know that the Neuro Tracker won't have any implications on well-being, if we can pair the Neuro Tracker with something that does help well-being, then there might be some added value to increase in performance, sports psychology, or other avenues as well. And by providing this basis of information, other people can take it on and take it in different directions. And of course, it's the limitations. Correlation does not equal causation. That's the flag that I'll always wave in these correlational studies. We had some sampling restrictions, as I talked about earlier. There's some potential framing effects, especially when people come in and they know they're going to do a mindfulness study and they know they're supposed to pay attention because it's an attention study. So there might be some potential framing effects there. And self-report mindfulness scales have really come under some criticism in the last couple of years. And there's definitely some validity to those criticisms. But we have these tools, and to measure dispositional mindfulness, they're really the only tools that we do have. So I do think that it's still important to do the work, but just noting that they do have these self-report scales do still have limitations. So thank you very much. I just want to thank you, the audience. I want to thank my supervisor, Kim, and my lab mates who I collaborated on this project with, Rob, Aaron, and Laura. They were a massive help.